Why, hello there. In this video, I'm going to talk about Lords of the Fallen 2023. I am 25 hours into the game, which I think is somewhere in the mid-game, and I am not done yet, but the reason I am doing this video now is because there's been some discourse about Lords of the Fallen, and I have some thoughts about it. So for some perspective, when Lords of the Fallen was announced, I was not into it. I was like, hell no, Lords of the Fallen 2014 sucks, quite frankly. I do not like that game at all.
Hear my vow. My vow of defiance.
And I really was not sold on even trying the game. But then in the pre-release marketing, they brought up the two worlds, which I thought might be an interesting gimmick. So upon receiving a code, I was basically hoping that the two worlds thing is cool and that the gameplay isn't atrocious, that it's at least serviceable. And so going from pretty lukewarm with very low expectations on this game to finding Lords of the Fallen 2023 to be not only pretty good, but a very good game. It's quite a journey for me, and I usually script my videos. I'm not scripting this one because I want to get some thoughts out there. I find there are some very exciting things about the game that I'd like to explain why I enjoy them so much. Let's get into it. When I got a code for the game, I downloaded it, got it going on PC. I have a 3060 graphics card, I have a decent processor, and overall not a top-of-the-line machine, but pretty decent, and the performance was terrible. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat that the performance was pretty bad the first day I was with it. There was some chat in the Lords of the Fallen Discord with creators who had also received codes with the devs, and by the next day a patch had come out that had greatly improved the performance. And over the course of the last week playing the game, I have seen like 3 or 4 patches come out. And now the game runs pretty well. I can put a comparison here because there's a real difference between how this game was a week ago and now, which I think bled into some of the reviews, and I'm not going to fault a games journalist or reviewer for saying the performance is really bad if that's their experience, and I think it sucks that that was their experience, but it has improved so much that I have a lot of faith in the devs that any issues that are still there should be resolved by them, and pretty quickly. They've done a whole lot of work, and I've just been really impressed with how they've taken feedback and they've implemented it in really sensible ways. Now, I can't apply that critically though, and just because a game doesn't run badly doesn't mean it's good either, which is where we get into the actual concepts and gameplay and how that actually all ends up shaking out for me. I gotta say, watching some gameplay previews prior to the game releasing, I thought the combat looked pretty clunky and bad. It had some visual effects issues, it seemed some like sound issues. I just wasn't super impressed. Playing the game myself, it has been pretty fine. Like, there has not been the issues that I thought there was. I think the gameplay feels pretty good. It's what I'm expecting from sort of a Souls-like game when it comes to combat, with a few highlights that I'll get into. The story and lore is also perfectly fine. I'm not super pulled into all the bits of the story, but I think there's some interesting world building, and there's definitely some good environmental storytelling, which I'll also get into a little bit more. The bosses have generally been fun, if not a little easy, which has already changed since my own experience with the bosses, because they've made some of the ones that are a little too easy a little tougher. So in all those ways, I think that Lords of the Fallen is a perfectly competent Souls-like, but I think the thing that my feelings about the game largely hinge on, and what I think could be the make or break thing for a lot of people when it comes to Lords of the Fallen, is how interested are you in the two worlds concept and exploration being really, really good. The two worlds concept is not just a gimmick, it's well implemented into the game, and it affects all aspects of the game in interesting ways. Axiom, which is the world of the living, and Umbral, which is the world of the dead. They use looking into Umbral with your lamp, and it just makes exploring the world interesting because looking through the lamp and seeing how the world might be different just makes you look at it in ways you're not looking at it in most games, and they're able to do cool things with that, and they do. They really seem to explore how you can use this to make navigating the world interesting and, a bit different than you would normally find. It's a real fantasy concept that they lean into. And then on top of that, looking into Umbral has this tension because you can be pulled into Umbral if you stumble across an Umbral enemy while looking through the lamp, So there's always that bit of tension when you're looking around. And also, some of the stuff in Umbral, the geometry and the geography of the world is different. And there can be some really startling vistas, which overall gives you the sense that when you look through the lamp, you're never quite sure what you might see. You might have a giant eye looking at you. You may have a 5-story tall, monstrous statue thing in front of you. It's really cool, and it's always mixing it up, and it's unexpected. And when you're in Umbral, that tension is also brought in that there will be continually Umbral enemies spawning in, and the longer you're in there, the more will spawn in, and the more difficult the type of Umbral enemies will come into your game. And so that adds the feeling that you're always like on the clock. And you can go into Umbral at any time, but you can't get out anytime. You get into Umbral by dying or purposely going through the lamp. So trying to get out adds this tension, and especially there's been plenty of instances where you're low on healing or you're out and you're in Umbral and you're just trying to find a place to rest, to get a checkpoint to save your progress. The checkpoints in the game are called vestiges, and you may have noticed that there's a system where you can put your own vestige down in certain locations in the game. This mechanic actually isn't as interesting or cool as I thought it might be. A lot of times I'd rather just have a thing to get to, and because sometimes I would put down a vestige in a location where I could put it down, I'd rest, I'd be happy that I got there, and then I'd turn the corner and there would be an actual vestige just right around the corner, feeling like I'd wasted the vestige seed that I had planted. So the system ends up being it's not as cool as I thought, and sometimes it can feel kind of like you wasted this kind of valuable resource. But Umbral has this real, just heavy atmosphere that I think is really cool, and it makes you a little reticent to go into it, but you also need to be looking there, exploring, because there's also a lot of items in there and ways to get around the level, and, just stuff to do in Umbral that you can't do in Axiom. And this is a minor example, so I don't think this is a big spoiler, but there's one area where there's this cave-in, and you look at this spirit that talks about how this cave-in happened, and the workers, he's trying to get them out. And that's what you see in Axiom, is just a pile of stones at this cave. And then if you look into Axiom, you see just this whole mass of corpses sort of reaching out. And I just like that atmosphere and the environmental storytelling where it's not like a huge reveal, it's just a little detail. And there's tons of those small details in the world where they use the events and the history in Axiom, and then they sort of represent them in interesting and evocative ways in Umbral. And I'm the lore hunter, so my ass loves that. And sort of on the world building thing, I mentioned the giant skyscraper style statues that are around. They're used for platforming, you'll crawl all over them. But there's this big depiction of a battle happening, and I'm still not entirely sure what it represents, but it's really interesting. It's one of the hooks pulling me through the game narratively, is that what is going on with all these tall statues? What does this represent? I assume it has to do with a deer getting sealed away, but I don't know, and I'm curious to find out more, and it's those really bold, evocative representations are helping sort of keep that interest going. And talking about another mechanic related to the Two Worlds system is this thing called Wither. Wither is this damage you take, it'll turn your health bar gray, and you can regain that health by striking an enemy, and you'll instantly lose all your Wither health if you get hit and damaged by anything. This is something that you'll build up in Umbral, but this is also used in the mechanics where if you're holding up a shield or a weapon to block an attack, you take some stamina damage, but you also take some Wither damage. And so I like how the system works, because you can guard and wait for an opening, and it stays there. It's not like Bloodborne where you have a limited time. It'll stay there. So if you manage to not get hit, you can tactically block some attacks and try to find your opening to regain that health. I think this is also something where this sort of blocking strategy can be really viable, and it is one of the ways that it's sort of different from Dark Souls, for instance, and it sort of changes your playstyle a bit, where you can be a bit more defensive. I'd say the pace of combat is, faster than Dark Souls, 1 for sure, and it's more in the Dark Souls 3 zone, but it's got some defensive vocabulary like Wither and blocking that I think give it this sort of measured pace, where if you're just thinking about what you're doing, you can make some tactical, interesting decisions. And I just haven't seen that brought up. I've seen wither damage, just like the Bloodborne regain mechanic, and I think it's a lot more interesting to that than that. And when you pair that with the fact that you'll get this wither damage in Umbral, it makes your play a bit more measured and a bit more thoughtful at times. And I think that's cool. I like that sort of pace. And tied into this, there's these like sacks that are in Umbral where you can use your lantern to siphon off of those, and that'll give you some wither health back, which then you can heal health if you manage to hit an enemy and regain some health. And I just like that too, because if you're in Umbral, it means you might be on the ropes, and that makes it easier because you can just lift up your lamp anywhere, you can see any enemies that are around you, and you can get some of those sacks, or you can even siphon off of parasites. And if you're in Axiom, it's sort of this risk-reward thing where you can use that to get some wither health back to heal yourself if you might be out of heals, but you do run the risk of getting pulled into Umbral if you're not careful and an Umbral enemy grabs you while you're holding your lantern up. And so kind of the big takeaway from all of this is that the two-world system, to me, it gets into every aspect of the game in interesting ways. And I think that alone, it takes this strong concept, one that I just have enjoyed from other games, and I think it's a really good implementation of it that gets into the gameplay in really thoughtful ways, and this makes for good world design, it makes for interesting level design, and it creates some moments of tension and sort of almost like survival horror elements that I just find really enjoyable during my time with the game so far. And this paired with what I consider as otherwise pretty competent Souls-like combat and a pretty competent story, not necessarily standouts, but they're all things that don't pull the game down for me. And then combined with the two-world system being so interesting and leading to great world design and great level design. And so far the devs have shown that they have a great ability to make some tweaks and improve performance, and that they're really listening to feedback and genuinely taking it in and applying it sensibly. And I just think the game is really worth trying. For all the reasons I've just said is kind of why I'm baffled by some of the really low scores, like a 4 out of 10. Like I know some of these things may hit stronger or weaker for you, but I really feel like the two worlds concept is so prevalent in the game, and I think it's executed so well that even with gameplay issues, it's hard for me to imagine putting it quite that low. I think personally right now I'd put it at like an 8 or an 8.5, and I'm really enjoying my time with it. So yeah, there's my thoughts. I will see how they continue through the game, but like I feel like I've gone through a number of areas, and I sort of have an idea of the scope of the game generally, and even if it nosedives at this point, I've really enjoyed this time with the game. It's a packed year, 2023. I've been playing Baldur's Gate 3. I dropped Baldur's Gate 3 so hard when I got pulled into Lords of the Fallen, and I just think it's really worth trying if you're into the exploration, if you're into, Souls games and you want a competent Souls game that has really great world and level design and really rewards you for exploring it and peeking around every corner. And if you want a Souls game that has, some minor like survival horror elements, it definitely has a bit of horror going on in the way that Souls games do, but this one has a little bit even more of it. If you want more Lords of the Fallen content, please give this video a like to show your interest, and please subscribe to the channel, have notifications on for future videos. I hope you have a great time if you check out the game. If not, 2023 is so packed, you'll have fun with something. Thanks for watching.